Abandoned locations are always creepy and unsettling. It could be a building or a road. Deserted roads, such as highways, have less people and vehicles around them, making them an ideal location for crimes. These incidents, which primarily target vulnerable individuals or people traveling alone to even families, never let anyone go unnoticed. Whether planned or not, the majority of the chilling episodes have been linked to these locations. Here are 4 bone-chilling true stories of highway horror to keep you awake at night. Number 1. He's getting closer. When I was younger, my family would pack the car and take a road trip to visit family in Mexico every summer and virtually every New Year's. We never had any troubles until one trip when I was 8 years old. We left our home in North Texas about 6 p.m. to be at our destination the next morning. So we crossed into Mexico around 2 a.m. and that's when things went crazy. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of nowhere, you don't mind if the same car follows you for miles. Outside our car windows, it was nearly pitch black, with just the dotted stars and the spooky shadows of the cacti visible. We had been in Mexico for about an hour and had a few more miles to go, and I remembered napping but being semi-conscious of what was going on around me because I didn't have the ability to fall asleep in a car. So when my mother abruptly said my father's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car in front of us. It's been a long time since we left Laredo." My father had a look at the car. My father glanced at the car, dismissing my mother's concern. "This road sees a lot of traffic. It will most likely travel to Reynosa or another city." And that was the end of it. Despite his assurance, my mother kept a cautious eye on the car in front of us. My siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car by this point, and we occupied ourselves by peering through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. We got exhausted quickly. "He's getting there," my mother observed, and we turned to watch as the car approached us. "He's getting too near, Miguel." And she was correct. The car was virtually plastered against the back of our car by this point. And on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, with only a few hours before sunrise, it was downright terrifying. We weren't able to do much. My father did not slow down, did not stop, and did not speed away. He simply drove. The car then followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever been through. The vehicle would ease off occasionally, only to smash its dazzling headlights against our back, as if he knew he was terrifying us out and enjoyed it. My mother noticed a police car up ahead sitting on the side of the road during one of the intervals where the car had pulled away, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over just in front of the cops. Miguel, pull over right now." And he did it, and the car continued to drive. I imagine the police officer was perplexed as he observed my father park our car directly in front of him. When the cop arrived and inquired what was wrong, my mother told him everything. The vehicle, how it followed us and taunted us. The officer took her statement seriously and told us about how many were defrauded and had their cars taken by thugs and crooks on these deserted routes. Then he promised to drive alongside us for a time to ensure our safety. We drove away, relieved, with the police vehicle trailing behind us, until approximately 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's remarks and my mother's worst fears. 15 minutes later, we noticed the vehicle stopped on the side of the road, waiting. Number 2. Just trying to get some sleep on the road. When I was younger, my family and I took a road trip to Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. It's a lovely place, and I would encourage you going if you haven't already. However, it was a 17-hour drive in our Yukon XL from our home in California. The largest, most comfortable road trip SUV you can imagine. It took us several days of on and off traveling to get there, and we spent the nights trying to find a little motel to stay at. When we were running late one night, my father attempted to drive through the night to get us there sooner. He probably made it until the early hours of the morning before deciding it was unsafe and parking us in this little unslate rest stop in the midst of the woods in some flyover state. If you find this story interesting, please make sure to pause and like the video to let us know you enjoyed it. My brothers and I had fallen asleep in the car many hours before he had stopped, so we would all been sleeping in the car in this dark, tiny parking lot surrounded by woods for at least a couple hours. I woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented but not terrified, after only a couple of hours of sleep and being in a very uncomfortable position. I looked around and saw that everyone was fast asleep in this pitch-black car, so I felt rather alone. I tried to sleep again, but it's not working, so I simply sit there for a while, boredom creeping in. When I looked out the window to see where we were, it was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything. Fortunately, I was the kind to pack light and had a couple of flashlights in my backpack. I reached into the backseat, unzipped my suitcase, and got out a small plastic yellow flashlight, taking care not to wake my sleeping family. It wasn't the brightest, but it was enough to view the broad surroundings in the foreground. I held it up to the glass, making sure not to make any noise, and turned on a small switch. I placed my nose to the window and gazed out. At first glance, it appeared to be normal tree line with some bushes, trees, and whatnot. But as I surveyed the darkness for animals, houses, and so on, I observed this dark shape standing between two trees in the distance. It had the shape of a man, yet it was motionless. I was just sitting there. I figured it was a bush or some kind of natural phenomenon after viewing it for a time and seeing no real evidence of movement. I was going to turn off the light and go back to sleep when I noticed face shadow shape turned 90 degrees and moved behind a tree, disappearing from view. This terrified me, so I turned off the flashlight and threw my sweater-turned blanket over my head, closing my eyes tightly and blocking my ears. I was paralyzed by terror and unable to sleep due to adrenaline, sat in a semi-fetal position, gripping my flashlight for the rest of the night. I didn't get any sleep till the sun came up and we were again on the road. I kept the man I saw in the woods a secret from everyone. Number 3. Real life can be scarier than any movie. I was on my way from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms lies in the arid high desert east of Los Angeles. Except for passing through Amboy, California, the shortcut was completely two-lane road through total nothingness. Amboy is a completely deserted village near Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also a hotspot for satanic group activities at the time. As a result, I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I pulled over in Amboy and took a picture of the city sign to show my friends, who had dared me to take that way to I-40. I got back in my car and drove up into the mountains between Amboy and I-40. I'm traveling north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Once I reach the top, I notice some stuff in the middle of the road ahead. When I get closer, I notice a red Pontiac Fiero parked sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and two bodies face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop about 100 feet away, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. As a Marine, I reached beneath the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol, chambering around. Something seemed off. It appeared too perfect, as if rehearsed. A surprise attack? Was I imagining things? Something was clearly wrong. Stepping out of the car seemed unthinkable, like something out of a horror film. When I scanned the road, I noticed a route I could take. I would pass the guy on the left side of the road, swerve to the right side of the woman behind the Fiero, and be on the other side. I shifted into first gear, punched it, and drove the anticipated line. I drove around the back of the Fiero without colliding with it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward for a few hundred feet before slowing down to breathe and let my heart to cool down. When I peered up into the rearview mirror, I noticed that the two bodies had rose to their knees and that 20 or so people had appeared from the tall grass on either side of the road. My right foot pushed the gas pedal to the floor at that point and didn't let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what might have occurred if I had stopped closer to the bodies or gotten out of the car to check on them. I don't think it would have been a good idea. Real life can be scarier than a movie at times. Number 4. A full face print. My aunts and I were on our way to see my grandparents. From Portland, Oregon, we drove nearly 3,000 miles to the Northwest Territories of Canada. The majority of the journey is spent on long, lonely highways. To pass the time, I thought it would be a good idea to bring along an unsolved mysteries book, because reading about murder is always a wonderful way to pass the time on a road trip. We stop at a campsite and sleep in the van. I was sound asleep in the front passenger seat. I thought I heard footsteps near the van, but saw nothing. When I awoke the next morning, I looked out of the window and noticed a full face print on the window. It was as if someone was keeping an eye on us. And that concludes our 4 stories. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree with the actions of the characters in the story? Do you believe you would have acted differently if it had been you? Which of the 4 were your favorites? Please share your thoughts in the comment section below, we would love to hear from you. Make sure to like this video, share and subscribe to keep up with our story marathons.